Hello, and welcome to Old News, where the fossils are old, but discoveries are new. My name is Laura Beth Spear. I'm your host, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on our live chat. So if you ever have any questions or you want to answer some of our questions, you can type that into the chat, and I'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Of course, we have Dr. Christian Kammerer, the museum's research curator of paleontology, here to share some new discoveries from somewhere around the world and tell us, why is it important? Why does it matter? What does it all mean? So everyone say hi to Christian. Hi, Christian.
Hi, Laura Beth. Good to see you.
It's good to see
Good
you.
to be here.
Yeah. Pretty nice day today.
Yeah, no, pretty good.
Yeah.
Clean and crisp.
And I think I've heard a lot of things outside, a lot of animals kind of like chirping, maybe flying around, swooping. Yeah.
Swooping.
Swooping, yeah. Some vultures.
Of course.
Yeah, it's a good day for some old news, right?
Yeah, especially since we're going to be talking about birds, our fine feathered friends. The old news true fans may remember that last month we talked about mammals, Mesozoic mammals. But this time around, we're going to be switching it up a little bit, moving to the other side of the tetrapod tree, talking about Mesozoic birds. So birds, of course, are living dinosaurs. They are descended from theropod dinosaurs, those carnivorous flesh-eating dinosaurs, animals similar to like Velociraptor and Troodon, not those particular genera, but sort of close relatives thereof, sometime in the Jurassic. But there's actually a lot of diversity of proper birds, not just feathered dinosaurs, in the Mesozoic. So if we can, let's look at our geological time scale here. So this is, again, the recent is at the top, and then it goes older as you go towards the bottom. And as we mentioned last month, we frequently consider the current era, the Cenozoic era, the age of mammals. And mammals certainly a very prominent and diverse part of the modern biota. But when you really think about it, in many ways, the Cenozoic could also be called the age of birds. So living mammal species, there are a lot of them. Currently, there are estimated to be around 6,500 valid mammalian species across a huge range of habitats and ecologies. But when you look at birds, there are 10,000 currently known named bird species, and recent estimates suggest that there may be as many as 18 or even 20,000 bird species living today. So one thing with the mammal species, like I remember, like 5,000 was the number of species usually set for current mammals. It was the usual number that was given. So around 1,000 of those have really just been named in the past 15 years or so. And a lot of that is coming from using new molecular techniques, looking at species groups, species clusters, finding cryptic species. And some of that work has also been done in birds, but not as exhaustively, certainly not to the degree as done in, for example, like primates or ungulates. So as that is, those sort of methodologies and taxonomic philosophies are applied more to birds. I think there definitely, will be thousands of new bird species in the making. But this is all to say that, regardless of how you split it up, there are quite a few more bird species than there are mammal species in this so-called age of mammals. So in many ways, we are living in the age of birds. You might even say that we're still living in the age of dinosaurs, as that group never really relinquished its title for most sort of species between the two of these. But of course, dinosaurs and birds are not giving this particular presentation, so I think we can still give mammals a little bit of credit here. But although the Cenozoic is the sort of the center of modern avian diversity, as I mentioned at the beginning, the fossil record of birds goes quite a bit further back into the Mesozoic. So it doesn't quite reach the Triassic like mammals do. But things that are usually called birds, they do appear in the Jurassic period. So the definition of like what is a bird is pretty arbitrary at this point when it comes to fossils. Historically, this animal Archaeopteryx, known from the Jurassic of Germany, from Zollenhofen, was considered the first bird, and it, more by tradition than anything else at that point, it sort of serves as the cutoff for like what we call a bird. Um, the origin of birds from dinosaurs is at this point so sort of exhaustively known and intensely studied that there isn't sort of a really good there isn't a clear break between what is dinosaur and what is bird. It's a very sort of even acquisition of sort of gradual more and more bird-like characters, to the point where, even telling sort of early things on the bird stem from things sort of on the velociraptor or the oviraptor stem can be very difficult. There's a lot of just like little small feathery dinosaurs from the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, whose relationships they're clearly bird-like, but exactly where they fall is difficult to tell. Oh my goodness, that is some fire alarms going off. So I'm going to mute myself for a
Oh,
moment. And can you hear that?
yep. They must
Okay.
be super excited about opposite birds.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Mesozoic bird madness. All right. So LP.
Okay, Christian, I'm gonna see if I can take over where we left off. And Christian, if you just give me a thumbs up, in our Zoom call, when that fire alarm is done, or hopefully Christian is safe, we'll keep you all posted. And while I'm pulling up my slides, I just want to say I have been now in 2 virtual programs since the pandemic started that the fire alarm goes off during, and so I'm starting to think that I am just like bad luck. Maybe not. We'll see. Oh, Christian, I see you're outside. Is it still very loud? Give us a thumbs up. Okay. All right. So sorry for the disruption, everyone. Christian says it's louder outside. So we'll try to keep it going. We'll see how long this lasts to make sure that Christian is okay. Right. All right, so we were talking about the Archaeopteryx and how it's kind of the accepted, like at the accepted beginning of, the bird lineage in the dinosaur world. But there were also these species called Ichthyornis and Hesperornis. And so they were both fossil specimens that were found in the Western Interior Seaway, which if you haven't heard of that, that's kind of like a sea that was basically broke up North America. And so these were, kind of aquatic birds. Hesperornis was living, well, it was swimming. It was mostly like diving and swimming, and so it had very reduced wings. It like wasn't very good at flying. Ichthyornis was a little bit different. I believe that one could fly, and it's like the smaller one here. And of course, Christian, when he comes back, he will like correct me if I'm wrong. But for a long time, these were, the only birds from the Mesozoic era that we really knew about. And so they were a little bit further along in their development to becoming like true birds, right? The way that we think about birds today. But if we look at their beak, we can see they had still teeth like dinosaurs have. And these are true teeth, right? So if you think about teeth, what are teeth made out of? Do you know? If you said calcium, that is wrong. They're not made of calcium like our bones are. They're made of a different material. So they've got, enamel, dentin, all that good stuff. And, they're true teeth. So they would like fall out of the bird's skull, out of its beak. Dinosaurs would. But, birds today, they don't even have teeth in their beak. So that was just one example of a characteristic that they kept that was kind of more like dinosaurs. And here is a better look at Hesperornis. I still like seeing these reconstructions from, even the 1880s, the 1800s. It's cool that paleontology has come such a long way. So Up until about the 1980s, those were the three species that we knew about in the Mesozoic era of birds. And then comes along this researcher, this paleontologist, Dr. Cyril Walker, and he discovers this bird based on just some isolated bone fragments. And, you know, from a layperson like myself, who is not a paleontologist, I'm looking at this, I'm like, how would you even know this was different from the other birds? Like, it just looks like a bunch of bones to me. But they were looking at the coracoid bone, which is a bone that is found in the pectoral girdle. So if you tap your chest right here in the middle, thump, 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 thump. You know, it's our pec area, and birds have that as well. They've got that, their sternum looks a lot different from ours. It's kind of, it comes forward to support their muscles for flight. But they've got this coracoid bone that's a part of that. And the coracoid bone in the Enantiornis, it actually looked very dissimilar from the coracoid bone of those previous birds that we talked about. And, you know, so much so that he thought, this is like the opposite view, almost. So he called them opposite birds. That's what the name Enantiornis comes from. And Christian is looking at me on the Zoom call. I'm going to tell him, give me a thumbs up if you're ready to come back. Oh, perfect. All right. Welcome back, Christian.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. The age we live in. Thank you for covering some of the background of Mesozoic bird knowledge up until recent days. In the meantime,
I tried.
Let me pull up good old Enantiornis, which I believe we left off at. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. And Christian, actually, before you jump back in, can you answer a quick question that I do not know the answer to?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So Sarah wants to know, is Hesperornis an ancestor of penguins? Because I did describe it as a diving bird.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Because, yeah, Hesperornis certainly looks a lot like a penguin. But it's actually a completely extinct group of diving birds. So they this same morphology of sort of being a flightless wing or foot propelled diver has evolved a bunch of different times in avian evolution. And so they look pretty similar due to convergence. But penguins, they're descended from basically the same group of birds as all the other living birds. So they don't have don't have separate ancestors among the various types of Mesozoic birds. They mostly diversified after the extinction that killed off most of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago.
Wow. That good old convergent evolution back again.
Yeah, it shows up a lot. It's well, there are some good ways to do something ecologically. And in the case of birds, sort of, diving they seem to be really good at it, actually.
Yeah.
So going back to Enantiornis here, let me bring this up. Let me actually try to see if I can get back inside. Still there's some construction noise going on outside. All right. So yeah, Cyril Walker, initially named this bird Enantiornis, which, as Laura Beth said, he recognized as being so different from other known Mesozoic birds to put it in an entirely new group, which he called the Enantiornithines. And that turned out to be actually right on the money. So this is very little to go on in terms of a fossil, although this is sort of typical of a lot of the Mesozoic bird record. They have very delicate bones, so it's hard to preserve. But then in 1992, this animal, Cynornis, was named. And this was known from a nearly complete skeleton, some breaks in it, but another Enantiornithine showing that they were indeed actually quite distinct from other bird groups and sort of much more much more primitive in many ways than any of the modern birds. So this animal Cynornis, the name just means Chinese bird. And this is one of the earliest discoveries in the 90s from what would become one of the best known fossil deposits anywhere in the world, which is the Jehol group of northeastern China, which a few years after this would start to yield the first feathered non-avian dinosaurs, things like Sinosauropteryx and Sinornithosaurus, which really revolutionized a lot of our modern understanding of bird origins and dinosaur evolution. And has also, in addition to the feathered dinosaurs, has produced just a ton of incredibly beautiful bird fossils, including lots and lots of these Enantiornithines. So if you look at some of them, these are just two examples here. There are dozens of named species and hundreds upon hundreds of specimens of these Jehol birds. Here we have Jornis and Rapaxavis, two pretty different actually looking Enantiornithines, but are just shown here as examples of just like the spectacular preservation there. So this really is, the entire skeleton of these birds, not sort of isolated bits and bobs like Enantiornis was. And some of these, like Protopteryx here, really, are among the best preserved bird fossils of all time, down to, the last feather. You can even see coloration on the feathers. You can, find gut contents, see the keratinous sheaths that cover the claws. Really just spectacular fossils from these deposits. But it's not just these Chinese deposits that Enantiornithines are now known. So now that we have basically sort of a good blueprint for this group and what these birds look like, scientists have been able to recognize more fragmentary material, either in existing collections or in new discoveries. And now, this group is basically known from around the world. So it turns out Enantiornithines are one of the dominant groups of Mesozoic birds, and were probably very common members of their ecosystems, basically all over during the original Age of Dinosaurs. So another thing that is interesting about them is where they fall on the phylogenetic tree. So they're not part of the modern bird group, as I mentioned before, but they fall in a very basal position here, but not quite as early of a divergence as things like Archaeopteryx, or this other group, the Confucius ornithids, which are also mostly known from China. Rather, they are a big diverse radiation that's sort of parallel to the Ornithurans, which is the group that includes modern birds, which mostly diversified, later on in the Cenozoic. During the Mesozoic, so most of the species are these Enantiornithines. And together, the Enantiornithines and modern birds make up this group called Pygostylia. This refers to one feature in which they're not very primitive. They actually do have the derived character, which is that they have the pygostyle. So this is best seen in modern birds. This is fusion. So you can see right there highlighted in green, fusion of the terminal caudal vertebrae to make this single structure that is the base for the sort of the tail musculature and the tail feathers, the attachment site there. What would be called the parson's nose in sort of a processed, or a chicken or a turkey that you're eating, something like that. But yeah, just sort of a really short, sort of robust structure, and not a long lizard-like tail like you get in dinosaurs, or even in earlier birds like Archaeopteryx. So there is some modification of the Enantiornithines there. So in looking at the Cretaceous Earth, these were flying animals, so they could go just about anywhere. And a lot of our knowledge of them probably does not reflect where they were actually living, but just where there are deposits of the right age and basically rocks that are able to preserve such delicate animals as birds. And so historically, a lot of these are in these Lagerstätten, like the Jehol group, most of which are in the northern hemisphere. But there have been a few Enantiornithines found in the southern hemisphere, Enantiornis itself from Argentina. And this time around, we're going to be talking about a discovery of what has been described as an enantiornithine from the island of Madagascar, which in the Cretaceous period was part of this Indo-Malagasy island subcontinent. So that's Madagascar still attached to India, floating around in what would eventually become the Indian Ocean. And you may remember earlier this year, back in May, we talked about this animal, the crazy beast, Adalatherium, which is this amazing complete early mammal skeleton from the Cretaceous of Madagascar. These deposits have also yielded lots of dinosaur and crocodile remains, some other cool mammalian remains. Also sort of one of the world's largest known frogs, this animal called Beelzebufo, the hell toad. But the most recent discovery from these sites in the Mevaran Formation in northwestern Madagascar is actually a bird. So it's this animal that has just been named as Falcata caeli forsterae. And you can see here, this is on the top left there, that's what the fossil actually looks like. So it's a bit, sort of jumbled up, but you can see that there's a very large plate of bone there. So it doesn't look as obviously like a bird as, those complete Chinese skeletons. But what's really nice about this specimen is that it does have three-dimensional preservation of these elements. So using, computed tomography, using CAT scan technology, the researchers who discovered this fossil, and so there was an American Malagasy collaborative group who work on these deposits, were able to fit all the bones of the skull back together, which is what's labeled in C there. And then there's a little drawing below that in D showing the reconstruction of it. And it's a very strange looking skull compared to what we know about most Mesozoic birds, which have, pretty short, small beaks for the most part. This looks a lot more like a living toucan or sort of a hornbill, one of these very giant beaked birds, very tall beaked birds. And this is something that we've never seen before in a Mesozoic bird. So you can also see there's a artist reconstruction on the lower right there of what this animal may have looked like in life. And it's really, is showing that there's a lot we have yet to learn about the amount of diversity in avian beaks and avian morphology in general in the Mesozoic. So we do think about, how most of the modern bird groups, all of that diversity did, that adaptive radiation is mostly from the Cenozoic. But that doesn't mean that these earlier groups of birds weren't having sort of their own radiations at their own time. And there's been some indications of that even before Falcata caeli, which I should also mention, it's the name means sort of bladed little one. So from Latin and Malagasy, caeli means little, which is something like that I actually used in an animal I described earlier this year, which was a little proto-dinosaur called Congonophon caeli, which is also a tiny little thing. And then falcatus is sort of a blade or a scythe in Latin. So yeah, little sort of blade would be the name referring to that beak. But just talking again about the diversity of beak form in these Mesozoic birds, if you go back to some of these Enantiornithines that we looked at before, Jehornis and Rapaxavis, their beaks are actually quite different. So Jehornis is very short and stout and tall. Rapaxavis very elongate with lots of tiny little teeth in there. And this does reflect some sort of trophic specialization. So something where they're diversifying between sort of different ecological niches based on what they eat. That's just all that trophic means. So Jehornis, and also because we have gut contents for some of these things, we can tell that those types of birds would have been eating sort of more nuts and seeds. Something like Rapaxavis would have been eating small fish, small animals, would have been a more predatory type of bird. So if we start to put this together, it turns out there's a lot more diversity in Mesozoic bird beaks, and presumably in their ecologies, than just sort of Archaeopteryx, Ichthyornis, Hesperornis, and even some of these early Enantiornithines would have indicated. You have these long-billed things, you have these short, powerful billed things, you have these seemingly like pseudo toucan type things like Falcata caeli. You have some that have very sort of robust finch-like beaks. Um, we're really, yeah, we've spent a lot of time, I think, focusing on like dinosaurs, like non-avian dinosaurs. It's been easy to overlook that there's been this whole revolution in our knowledge of Mesozoic birds, both their species number, their abundance, and their diversity, and then showing that they're actually were a very important part of Cretaceous ecosystems. And it's just that they're so difficult to preserve because their bones are so delicate, that we've been missing out on it before some of these exceptional sites were discovered. And so now that paleontologists sort of know what to look for, I expect that this will only increase. And this parallels what we've learned about Mesozoic mammals too. So rather than just being sort of the tiny little shrew-like things running around below the dinosaurs, we now know Mesozoic mammals were extremely diverse. And it seems Mesozoic birds are very much the same. So excited to see what the future brings. Probably even crazier looking Mesozoic birds as we just, look at further into some of these deposits.
Yeah. Do you think we'll find any birds that look, like absolutely nothing like anything we've seen today?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So a lot of these Mesozoic birds, they do fit somewhat into the modern morphotypes. Like there's a penguin or a loon type thing. There's a seagull type thing. There's a toucan-like thing. Um, if I think things sort of that are right at the border between birds and dinosaurs are where like the real wild experimentation was. Birds are pretty successful at what they do. Some of these dinosaur groups, the non-avian dinosaur groups, that really are like total dead ends and clearly did not really work out long term, I think are the weirdest ones. Like that animal Ambopteryx and E that we talked about in an earlier old news, which is the sort of the bat-winged glider dinosaurs. So that evolved a totally different form of flight than modern birds. And there were 4 or 5 genera of these things living in China in the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous. So it wasn't like it's just a one-off, but clearly they did not survive and thrive to the degree that birds have. And a lot of the animals sort of like in that part of the tree are like that, just like totally unlike anything living today.
Mm-hmm. So the fossil specimens of Falcata tackley, did I say that right?
Falcata caeli.
Falcata caeli.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the fossil beak, it reminds me of a toucan. I think you might have said that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's another example of convergence, obviously, because they are in two different groups. In fact, opposite groups of birds, right?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, toucans have like the strongest bite force of any bird alive today, right? So is there
true?
any way?
I actually did not know that.
I'll have to fact check myself.
Okay.
But it just made me curious about, this species, especially since its name comes from, the word blade, like, little bladed one. Are we thinking that this one also had a really, really strong bite force? And how would you determine that as a paleontologist?
Well, it's difficult to tell. So you can look at the mechanics of fossil skulls. So like there is a lot of work calculating forces and things like, T-Rex or Deinosuchus or Dunkleosteus or any of these other sort of mega predators where you can say things like, oh, it's got X number of newtons. Isn't that amazing? Bite force. So, I mean, those methodologies certainly can be applied even to, less impressive biters, like a bird. With that said, it is, unless you have mapped the musculature and like done all the estimates for that, it's difficult to sort of come up with those numbers. So, for Falcata caeli, they don't have all of the back of the skull preserved, and also we just don't know enough about the muscles of these stem birds. I haven't seen many like full muscular reconstructions of Enantiornithines in order to do that research. It's possible because we have these beautiful skeletons, but yeah, I just don't think that's been has been a research priority. Unfortunately, I think it's difficult to get grant funding for estimating bite force of, tiny sort of sparrow-sized birds.
Right.
One thing I will say regarding your questions there, though, is that it does differ from toucans in that it still has teeth. So there are little teeth at the base of the beak. And so it would have been maybe manipulating its food somewhat differently than a toucan would. So, toucans mostly eating, well, I mean, they will take some live prey, but, most like fruit and nuts and things like that. So Falcata caeli may have been sort of nipping little things more at the tip of the beak. All very speculative, but it is, there is a difference between being toothed and toothless in how you're addressing foodstuffs.
Yeah.
And I should also say that like some of these, like there's a lot of variation also in tooth number and shape in these Mesozoic birds. So there are ones that are totally toothless. There are ones that have lots of little teeth, like when you were showing Ichthyornis. So Ichthyornis means fish bird, and that's referring to the fact that it was a fish eater, not that it itself is particularly fishy. So that long beak with lots of little teeth on it is a sort of very classic fish eaters morphology.
Okay. I don't know why, but I just assumed that all of their teeth would be shaped kind of like triangular and sharp. I don't know why. We have a couple of questions from the chat, but really quickly, I just wondered if um, is beak shape and size, is that ever, there for a purpose besides just gathering food, eating food? Like, is it ever used in like mate selection or
Yeah, for sure.
communication?
So a great example of that is puffins. So puffins, the males have these. Maybe you've seen they have these like very tall, elaborate beaks with like bright colored stripes and things on the side there. So they actually only grow that for part of the year during the breeding season. So their beaks are actually, even though their beak is, it's bone covered in keratin, they actually grow more keratin and then slough it off later in the year. So the beak is smaller and less colorful during the rest of the year. And yeah, so there's like sexual dimorphism in beak size is another thing that you see in birds, even sometimes that's present all the time. So yeah, mate selection, species identification, absolutely part of it. And with something like Falcata caeli also, we don't know, we only have the one specimen. So we can't really say anything about variation or dimorphism in it. So in the Chinese fauna in the Jehol group, there are so many specimens there that preserve the feathers that we can say Confucius ornis was sexually dimorphic. So one of them, which is interpreted as the male, has these very long streamer-like feathers on the tail, and the other one interpreted as the female does not. So
Like a
there,
peacock, sort of.
yeah, not too different from that.
Huh. Very, very cool. Let's go ahead and get to these questions from the live chat. Anne is asking, are egg teeth real teeth, like vestigial, or just beak, like serrations in the beak?
Yeah, so she's talking about egg teeth. So egg teeth are not teeth at all. So they are something that's present in animals that have hard-shelled eggs, like reptiles. That it grows on the tip of the nose, and it's not sort of a proper tooth. It does not have like dentine and enamel in order to rip open the egg, in order to poke open the egg as they're coming out. So it's a sort of a dermal elaboration. It's not a proper tooth. So these things in the like Falcata caeli and the other Mesozoic birds, they are true teeth. So they would have had all of the structure of a reptilian tooth.
Awesome. And Anne also asked, why is that fossil so well preserved? And Anne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're probably talking about Protopteryx, because I wondered the same thing when I first saw it. Why is it so well preserved, and can DNA be collected from it?
So no, it's too old to get DNA. Um,
Womp
but
womp.
the I mean, arguably Falcata is also very well preserved by the standards of Mesozoic birds, like outside of this, wild, particularly, uh, good Lagerstätten in the Jehol group. Um, so Protopteryx, though, so the whole Jehol group is uh, what you're seeing there is there are a series of lakes and volcanic regimes. So what's happening is one, these animals are falling into the water and then they're being covered in a sort of a very, very fine dust of volcanic ash. And so that is very good at preserving all the details. So there's not any scavengers coming in and tearing the carcass apart. These animals are they're in the water and they're covered in ash. Some of them may even have been killed by these volcanic eruptions, sort of Pompeian type pyroclastic flows. Um, but in general, these they were. I mean, the Jehol group actually goes through millions and millions of years, and these volcanoes were present in the area for a long time. So it doesn't seem like there was just like one big eruption that killed everything. Like this is a long time where animals are living in what seems to be actually a very productive habitat, and then just every so often they get covered in ash. But the ash is very good at preserving fine detail. Anything that is very small grained is good at that. So it doesn't have to be sort of a disaster like a volcano. Even things like limestones uh, can be very good at preserving that have a very fine grain size. That's where you get things like Archaeopteryx is in a limestone. A lot of the other really spectacular Lagerstätten of the Cenozoic are mostly in limestones.
Hmm. And what kind of fossils are these? Or is it where, it's like an impression where it's been pressed into the sediment? Or is
So a
it?
lot of them, yeah, are two-dimensional. So they're preserved basically as a panel against the back. It's not sort of like a three-dimensional bone that's being fully prepped out. But it does vary even between the strata there. So there are some parts of the Jehol group that are more three-dimensional, and others that are more two-dimensional, depending on both how it was first entombed and then also the subsequent geological history of that area, whether there's been a lot of tectonic compression of the surrounding rock through uh, subduction, just plate activity after that.
Hmm. All right. And I have another question. Just like looking at the broad ecosystem, that these Enantiornithines were living in, were they around during the time of other flying reptiles, like the big pterosaurs? And if so, were they directly competing with them, or were they kind of ignored because they like tended to be smaller, or just, you know, did something else with their life besides whatever the pterosaurs did?
Well, so this is actually something that there's been a good amount of recent research about. So pterosaurs are the original flying vertebrates. So they first take to the skies in the Triassic, and then were very successful throughout the Jurassic period. But in the Cretaceous, you actually see pterosaur fortunes starting to decline. And so there are fewer species of pterosaurs. They're less abundant towards the end of the Cretaceous. And basically, by the end of the Cretaceous, the only groups that you have left are the true giants, so things that are in the 20-foot plus size range. So things like Pteranodon, and then especially this group, the Asdarchids, which includes things like Quetzalcoatlus is probably the best known, but also things like Hachigopteryx and Aramborgiana, things like that. So really, these are airplane-sized, the largest flying animals of all time. And so there has been research looking at possible competition between pterosaurs and birds, because in the Jurassic you have lots of small-bodied pterosaurs that are insect eaters, that are fish eaters, that are maybe fruit eaters, and a lot of those body sizes and those ecologies are being we see those occupied by birds, especially the Enantiornithines in the Cretaceous. So is it possible that birds are coming into these ecosystems and taking over, basically doing the pterosaurs' job better than the pterosaurs and sort of out competing them? Um, Some papers have, analyzed this and have suggested that yes, that is the case. It's exceptionally difficult to test hypotheses of competition in the fossil record. So it's all going to be speculative to some degree. We can't, we'll never be able to see a pterosaur and a bird trying to get the same fruit and fighting over it and the bird winning, for instance. So there's just no way for that to fossilize, unfortunately. But looking at the larger trends, it is possible that pterosaurs were outcompeted by birds, at least at these small body sizes. It seems like the birds could never really do the things that pterosaurs could at giant body size. You do get very, very large birds in the Cenozoic, things like Pelagornithids or some of these giant condors, the teratorns, that are getting into the 20-foot size range, but nothing like Quetzalcoatlus, where we think it had like a 40-foot wingspan.
Wow, that's just incredible to think that they could have actually competed and outcompeted, those animals. And I kind of wish that we could travel back in time and do, prehistoric YouTube videos.
Yeah, wow.
Animal interaction.
There's a lot of amazing stuff we'd be able to see if that was the case.
Right. All right. Well, Christian, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. To everyone watching, thank you for joining us. And
oh wait,
questions.
Laura Beth, I do have one point, because while we were talking, I looked it up. Toucans actually have a very weak bite force.
Do they really?
I think you're thinking of parrots.
Oh, I was thinking of parrots.
Like macaws have a huge bite force, but it turns out the strongest measured bite of any living bird is the Galapagos groundfinch.
Oh, wow. So, like, compared to what its body size, it's got a really strong bite force. Okay.
Yeah, because it's only, they're little. It's a little finch, but it has bites for 70 newtons. So that's a lot for that size.
Wow.
But this is one of these, one of these so-called Darwin's finches, which are actually more closely related to tanagers, but that's a whole another topic. But it's one of the ones that's specialized for eating nuts. So they crack open, what are actually pretty resistant nuts and seeds at that small size.
All right. Wow. Well, I must have just been thinking that like bigger equals stronger. So my bad. Thank you for looking that up and correcting that so that no one walks away from this thinking that toucans are really strong.
No problem.
Well, again, thank you for joining us, everyone, and mark your calendars for January 12th, 1 p.m. That is our next episode of Old News, and you can register for that program by clicking the link in the video description. You can find that on our website and register, and you'll have the option of registering for just that program, every program through the end of this season, which is going to be May 2021, or every program in the entire series forever. So thank you again. I hope everyone stays safe and have a great day. Bye.
Yeah, have a good day, everyone. Hope your days are less loud than mine.